Like Felicia said, hopefully you're all here and ready to learn how to do some knitted cables. My name is Claire, and I'll be hanging out in the chat with you, answering any questions there or passing them on to Darren so he can demonstrate for us on screen. So if you do have any questions about the class content, go ahead and pop it in the chat. I'll also put the handout in there in case you need that again, both the link to the online version or the PDF. And let's see, Felicia said we're recording this, so you can watch it back later. That's the other thing I got to cover. But now that that's all out of the way, we'll let Darren take over.
All right, welcome to class, everybody. So today we are going to learn how to do knitted cables. And it's kind of the good news and the bad news about cables is they're really not that hard to learn. So once you learn a few basic little tricks on how to manipulate the yarn and to move the stitches around, and learn how to make the cables, pretty much all the cables you'll ever make are based off of that same little switcheroo we're going to show. So, once you get the hang of it, cables are going to be something that you can feel confident putting into all of your projects, or whenever you feel like you want to make something look a little bit more interesting or give it some texture. Cables will be a great option for that. And you're going to we're going to learn this and see how they're really not very hard. So if we want to go ahead and switch the view to the view of my hands, we'll jump right in and get started. So first of all, I'm going to be using, for my class demonstrations today, I'm going to be using this yarn, which is Lion Brand Hometown Bonus Bundle. And this is a number 6 yarn. So if you look on the back, you can see the size of the yarn, and it recommends a size 13 needle. So you can use whatever yarn you really want, but I really like teaching with this yarn because it's very easy to work with, it's very nice, and it gives a great stitch definition so students can see what I'm doing a little easier. So, but this is the yarn I'm going to be using in class, and it is available on either lionbrand.com or michaels.com, and it comes in a really great variety of colors. That's what we're using in class. And then just the only special tool that you need when you're making cables is you need some type of a cable needle, and they come in all different shapes. These two are really similar.
Hey, Darren.
Yeah?
Just remember, when you look down, we can't hear you as well when you talk.
Okay. Let me bring my computer a little closer. So the needles are all shaped a little different, but they pretty much do the same thing. So these needles have this little divot or this little bend in the middle. And what's going to happen is your stitches can rest on those. Or I like this one better, which is shaped like a J or like a U, however you want to look at it. And the stitches then just kind of rest in this little arch down here. And because it's shaped like a J, the needle is kind of out of your way. It doesn't, get in the way of your knitting. So, but there are lots of different things you can use. If you don't have a cable needle, that's fine. You can use a double pointed needle. You could use a chopstick. You could use a pencil. Just for anything for practicing. If you decide you really want to start doing cables, then I'd recommend getting a cable needle because it will make things easier in the long run. And as as I start demonstrating, you'll see what exactly it's used for and how it's used. So cables are created by knitting stitches out of order. Cables can be worked as few as 2 stitches or as many as you like. You can work 6 stitches, as we're going to do in our example today. You'll have 3 stitches that transfer to the cable needle, and then we'll either hold the cable needle in the front or in the back. And that's what's going to give us some interesting choices on how to make our fabric shaped. It'll change the direction of the fabric, the way it's moving. And so then you just knit 3 stitches, and then you knit the stitches again back off of your cable needle. And so that way we're knitting them out of order. Cables are often written as either called cable twists or a cable cross because the stitches are crossing over each other. You might see it written out like 3/3 LC or 3/3 RC. And that means 3/3 left cross or 3/3 right cross. So these swatches, I just want you to kind of get a look and see what kind of things are possible with cables. So this one, you can see it's supposed to be hugs and kisses. It has an O and an X. So this creates the pattern for hugs and kisses. It's super cute. This one is a honeycomb shape. So if you had this over a longer piece of fabric, you really see the honeycombs. It's very insulating and very nice. And this one is just pretty much a basic twist, which you've probably seen a lot of that one. And this one is shaped like a horseshoe. So you get this special shape here. Now, the secret about all of these different varieties of cables is that we create them all the exact same way. The only difference is the way we position them on our fabric. So sometimes we'll turn left, sometimes we'll turn right. Sometimes we have them right next to each other, and sometimes we have them more spread out. So it's really exciting to learn how to do that. Any questions before we jump right into making the cables? I'm going to demonstrate now. Any preliminary questions? Okay. So if you're following along on the exercise today, you might want to follow along with this or work on it later. It wants us to cast on 18 stitches, and then the first 2 rows are just knits and purls. So knit 2, purl 6, I'm sorry, yeah, start on the back. And then the second row is purl 2, knit 6, purl 2, knit 6, purl 2. So I'm on row 2. I'm on row 3 of this pattern, getting ready to start row 3. And row 3 is purl 2. It's got my purl 2s right here. So purl 2. I'm going to lay that down and we're going to look at our pattern. The pattern is telling us right here, 3/3 RC, and then we're going to purl 2, and then it's 3/3 LC. So that is the exciting part. That is the cable. So I'm going to use this cable needle to start with. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to slip very carefully 3 stitches onto my cable needle. So 1, 2, 3. And then I'm going to let them rest in that little U shape, and that way they're not going to fall off. And it wants me to hold this. It says 3/3 RC, which means the R means it's going to be a right leaning cable. It's going to lean to the right. So it's very important. And if we're going to have it lean to the right, we have to hold our stitches in the back of our work. And so a little memory crutch to help you remember which direction. If you put your cable needle in the back, and then you can say to yourself, I'll be right back. So I'll be right back. And that helps you to remember that if you put them in the back, then your stitches will lean to the right. Okay. So now I'm going to knit just normal knitting, just everything just like normal. I'm going to knit 3 stitches from my left hand needle, just like normal. And now I have to knit these stitches from this cable needle onto my right hand needle. I have to work these stitches. Now, sometimes I've not been paying attention and I've just gone on and left these hanging out on my cable needle. And so that's a big mistake. Don't do that. Make sure you're paying attention. And so I'm going to look at these stitches, and here is an opportunity to make a mistake. So it could be real easy to kind of twist this and turn it backwards. So you want to make sure that when we're knitting into it, that we're looking at knit stitches. So we don't want to turn it to the back and have purl stitches facing us. So just take 1 second and make sure you're actually looking at the knit stitches. And then position your yarn in the right place. And then just like normal knitting, I'm going to knit 3 stitches from my cable needle And that is my first cable cross, my first cable turn. And so now I'm going to purl 2, according to my pattern, purl 2. And then the next set of instructions is telling me 3/3 LC. And so I'll use this one this time. So I'm going to have 3 stitches crossing over 3 stitches, and they're going to lean to the left. So the LC means it's a left leaning cable. So when you slip the stitches onto your cable needle, so when you're slipping stitches, you want to slip them as if to purl. So you enter the stitch as if to purl and transfer it right over, because that way you're not twisting your stitches. If you take it like this, you're going to end up twisting them. So just kind of put your needles kind of tip to tip and then slip right in there and get that stitch. So now I've got my 3 stitches resting on my little needle. And if I want these to lean to the left, I need to hold it in the front. So the last time we held it in the back, this time we're holding it in the front. And a little memory crunch to help you remember that is I left the front door open. So if you left it open, you're holding it in the front and it's going to lean to the left. So I left the front door open, hold it in the front, and then just like normal knitting, you're going to knit 3 stitches, just normal, and make sure your needle doesn't fall out. And then double check and make sure, this one's easier because it's right up in the front and you can see it, but just give it a double check and make sure you're looking at knit stitches. You don't want to turn it by mistake. And then I'm just going to knit 3 stitches from my cable needle. And again, this is just normal knitting. Nothing special. I'm just using an extra needle. All right, so now I'm done with that. And I'm going to finish my row. So knit purl 2 for my last 2 stitches. All right. So now we have done our first cable cross. We've had all that excitement, and we can't wait to look at it. And what is it going to look like? Kind of looks like a hot mess, right? So that's the disappointing thing about cables. The first row, the first cable twist is never really going to look so good. You have to kind of do 2 or 3 before it starts taking shape. So if you do your first, whenever you do your first cable twist, don't lose heart if it doesn't look exactly, super exciting, because it does take a little while to start taking shape. But if you look really close, you can see that these stitches are kind of leaning this direction, and these stitches are kind of leaning that direction. So as long as you're seeing that there's a little bit of movement, don't panic, just kind of keep going until you get to the next twist and see how things look by then. And then you just turn your work just like normal knitting. And on this pattern, and on most patterns with cables, once you establish your knits and purls, you're just going to continue knitting your knits and purling your purls as established. Not always, but in this pattern, in this little exercise, we are. So I'm purling my purls and knitting my knits as I come to them. Okay. Any questions about anything? I will demonstrate this several more times. So, okay, I'm not going to finish that row. What I am going to do is switch out this swatch for a new swatch. Okay. So this swatch is pretty much the same as this one. So this one, I just did my first cable cross right here, and it did not look super exciting. And then after you do your cable cross, row 3 is where all the excitement happened. So row 4 and all wrong side rows, you're just going to knit the knits and purl the purls like I showed you as established. Row 5, you're going to purl 2, knit 6, purl 2, knit 6. That's basically just knitting the knits and purling the purls. They're not giving you any more even number rows because that's all the wrong side rows. So it's skipping to row 7, and then it's skipping row 8, because it told us what to do here. And we don't have anything new happening. We don't have anything unusual happening again until row 9. So there are 6 rows in between rows 3 and row 9. And so, for the most part, everything is just normal knitting, just kind of straightforward knitting. Okay. So where I am right now on this swatch is I just finished row 8, and now I'm on the right side of my work. And that way you can kind of see how it's going to take shape for the next turn. It'll start to look more exciting. So purl 2. So start thinking of your questions, because I know there probably should be questions. Purl 2, just normal purls. And then 3/3 RC. So slip as if to purl always, so you don't twist your stitches. 1, 2, 3. And it's going to be leaning to the right, so I'll be right back. So I'm going to put it in the back. And then just position your yarn to the right place. I'm going to knit just like normal, knit 3 stitches from my left-hand needle. Okay, I'll stop. And I'm going to get my cable needle, double check, make sure it's not twisted. I'm looking at knit stitches. Here, so you can see my cable needle, and there's my 3 stitches. Now I'm just going to knit them. Make sure your working yarn is in the right place. Whoops. Make sure your working yarn's in the right place. So I'm just going to now I'm going to purl 2 according to my pattern. And let's just look at it quickly and see what happened, so we can kind of compare it side by side. So you can see here, it's starting to really shape up into a nice twist. And by the time you do the 3rd one, you'll see how the pattern is going to start to establish itself. So it's twisting, this one's leaning to the right, and then this one's leaning to the right, going over top of it. And then the next one again will kind of veer out and lean towards the right. So now I'm going to do my next one, which is a 3/3 LC. So that one's going to be 3 stitches over 3 stitches leaning to the left. So I'm going to slip them on my cable needle, 3 stitches. I left the front door open, so the front, we're going to hold it to the front so it leans to the left. And then knit my 3 stitches. Okay, and then don't leave your cable needle behind. Make sure you work from your cable needle, just like normal. All right, and now I have to finish my row, so I'm going to purl 2. See, and there I'm done. That's me done with that row. Okay, so now we can see by the 2nd row, you can start to see the movement of your stitches. So if you can just kind of hang in there until you get to the 2nd row, look at it and see how it's shaping up. Sometimes that first row of that first cross looks funny, but then once you get up to the 2nd cross, which is like 6 stitches, 6 rows in between, then that 2nd cross will start to give it some shape. Okay. What questions do we have?
And just to clarify which cable you're doing, this is from the first page of the handout still, right?
Yeah, this is from the first page of the handout. It's a little exercise that's on 18 stitches. So, and this is just a basic, very basic cable, but once you master this cable, you can do any cable at all. This is basically how all cables work. Any questions?
And we do have a question. Andrea says, it feels very tight when knitting from my cable needle. Any suggestions?
Well, it shouldn't, if your stitches are very tight in general, you might need to go up a needle size. But if you're just slipping them onto the cable needle, they shouldn't be so tight. What do you think, Claire? What would make them tight?
Maybe you're accidentally twisting them as you're slipping them to the cable needle.
That's a good point. Yeah, double check that. Make sure you're slipping them as if to purl. So when you say as if to purl, kind of put the tips of your needles tip to tip, and basically you're just pushing it over. So that way, see, here's entering it as if to purl. So that way you're not twisting them. You're sliding them over and keeping them straight on. Okay. Any other questions? Does that help? Do you think that was a problem?
And can we see the back of the swatch? So let's see what that looks like.
Yeah, the back never looks so pretty. So there are reversible cables where the front and the back look the same, but that's for a different day. It's the same basic principle. You're just kind of arranging knits and purls together. Okay.
And we've got a couple questions about keeping knit and purl stitches straight. For that, I would probably recommend going back and watching some of our Knitting 102 recordings that are on the Michael's YouTube channel, because we talk a little bit more about how to recognize those stitches in that class.
Yeah, before you start knitting cables, you really want to be very comfortable with identifying knits and purls and working them in the same row together without supervision, like being able to do that comfortably on your own. Really, once you get that little bit of skill set established, that's all. You don't need to be an experienced knitter. You don't need to have made many projects. All you really need to know is basically how to be able to identify knits and purls and to work them interchangeably in the row. So one of the problems with knitting cables that I run into is trying to remember sometimes what line I'm on. So sometimes it's easy to forget, which line you're on, or which row. So what I do sometimes is every time I finish a row, I'll put a stitch marker, and then that helps me keep track of my rows. And then I can just count them, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So then I knew I was ready for my cable twist. Now you can just count your stitches, but sometimes that's hard to do. You're not sure, was it this stitch or was it this stitch? So 1, 2, 3, 4, where, or was it down here? I'm never sure when I'm doing it that way because they're going at an angle. So I like to put a stitch marker to mark the end of each row. If you change them, if you have 6 rows in between here, and then you have 7 rows in between, and then 8 or 5, it does change the look. It might not seem like a big deal, but it will change the look of your cable. So just kind of keeping track of what row you're on. You can write it down on a piece of paper. You can put a check mark. Sometimes there's apps on your phone you can use, or a little stitch counter, like a row counter. How do you do it, Claire? How do you keep track?
I might put like little hash marks on my paper or use like a physical clicking row counter.
Yeah, so that's really however it works best for you, but you just want to make sure that you're not losing track of what row or what line you're on. Okay, and that helps me keep track. And now here is, so I've knitted this swatch up to the next cable turn. So are there any questions on how I'm doing this? You guys, are you able to see it clearly? Is it making sense? So 3/3 RC. 1. See how I'm slipping my stitches just straight over. So it's going to lean to the right. So I'll be right back, put it in the back. And then knit 3 stitches. And then I'm going to knit them from my cable needle. You see, this way we're just changing the order of the stitches. We're knitting them out of order. Any questions? I'm happy to take any questions. And then 3/3 LC. So 1, 2, 3. I'm going to have these lean to the left. So I left the front door open. So I'm going to hold it in the front. And then knit them from my cable needle. And then finish the row. Try not to let your needle fall out of your stitches if you can avoid it. All right, and that is the 3rd cable twist complete. And so now you can really start to see how that's going to show up on your pattern, on your design. Okay, what questions? No questions?
I think we're good to move ahead to the next type of cable.
Okay. All righty. So the next type of cable. So basically, we're going to be doing the cabling in the same way, but the only thing we're changing is the placement of the cable. So it's still the same technique. We're still, doing our holding it in the front or holding it in the back. We're not, inventing a whole new way. But sometimes cables are presented to you in written form, and sometimes they're presented to you in a chart. So I do want to go over charts and teach you how to read a chart, and that'll come in handy for other skills as well. The chart is a visual representation of the right side of your knitted fabric. So each box of the chart will represent 1 stitch. There is a symbol in the stitch, and that will represent the stitch that you're supposed to do for that for each box. So in this situation, we have this chart right here, and each one of these rectangles counts as a stitch, and then some of them don't have any symbols, and some of them have an asterisk, and then some of them have these crazy lines. So what we're going to do is we're going to look here. So the asterisk means purl on the right side, knit on the wrong side. An empty box means knit on the right side and purl on the wrong side. So that sounds easy. And then these crazy lines here are 3/3 LC and 3/3 RC. Now we just learned how to do that, so that's pretty easy too. So this chart should be pretty easy to read, okay? And so these little lines here they're kind of pointing to the right, and these ones are pointing to the left. So that's a clue for us. So we're going to just basically work knits and purls until we get to line number 3. This one is leaning to the right. So this is the right cross cable, and this one is going to be the left cross. Now, the main difference between, this is exactly what I was just doing in the other exercise, but the difference is we don't have any purl stitches in between. So the other one, in between the cables, I had this row of 2 purl stitches making this column here to separate the cables. And because these don't have the separation, it creates a whole new visual effect. So let me show you how to do that. So we're going to purl, which is normal purling. And then knitting. So 1, oh, wait a second, I'm jumping ahead of myself. So 3/3 RC. So 1, 2, 3. I'll be right back. So put it in the back. And then knit 3. And then don't abandon your stitches on your cable needle. All right, and that is that cable needle, that cable twist done. It's done. Now we're going to jump right into the next cable. There's no purl separation or knit separating it. So 1, 2, 3. So 3/3 LC. So this is going to be a left leaning cable. So I'm going to hold it to the front and then knit 3. So 1, 2, 3. And then knit them from my cable needle. Okay. And then finish my row is 3 purls. Oh, sorry about that. All right. And as you can see, that is continuing kind of this horseshoe pattern, like how one horseshoe comes out of the other one. And so doing the exact same thing that I did in the first exercise, you're getting a complete different visual look. It looks completely different. So these look like 2 separate, kind of braids or twists going, and this one is kind of horseshoes coming that way. So if you did these on a sweater right next to each other, doing the exact same thing, except positioning your stitches a little differently, you can create 2 complete different looks. So that could be really fun to do on a sweater or a hat or whatever you want. But you're not, people will feel like you've had to learn all these crazy things. Well, really, you just learn 2 things: hold it in the front or hold it in the back. I mean, it's that easy. So any questions about that one or anything we've talked about? I do want to go over the chart a little bit if we're ready for that. You can see all my crazy teacher notes.
Do cables reduce the stretchiness of the fabric?
They do. They make it a little less stretchy. And so usually the designer will have already figured that out for you. So if it's a sweater or a hat, then they will have accounted for that in the gauge. But it does make it a little less stretchy, and it does put in a little tighter. So if you were just to add cables randomly to your favorite hat pattern, it might be a little more snug than usual. What do you think, Claire? It's still pretty stretchy though. It's just kind of pulls it in, right?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on how many cables you're going to add to. Like if you were just adding one, rope cable or horseshoe cable, that's still going to be pretty stretchy. But if you suddenly want to do the whole hat of cables, then you're going to want to do a gauge swatch, which I know is no one's favorite thing.
You can see they're pretty stretchy, but it does, if this were just stockinette stitch, it would be much wider. Okay. All right, so a chart. So when you're looking at a chart, you can either be knitting flat or knitting in the round. And you want to look and see where your numbers are. So starting here with number 1, so this is my first row, this is where I'm starting. Go across, and then number 2 is here. So that means I'm going to go up and back across. So this is knitting flat. And here I'm going to be, because of the asterisk, I'm going to be purling. So purling all across, 3 purls, and then all of these knits, and then 3 purls. Go up to row number 2. Now I'm going to be knitting these because, you know, we want to continue. We purled these, so of course on the back of the work when we turn it, these purls magically turn into knits. So we're just going to knit our knits and purl our purls as we come to them, going across, and then up to the next one. And then row number 3 is where the excitement happens. Okay, so that's the exciting row right there. And then you just keep going back and forth, kind of zigzagging up your chart. And this chart has 10 rows. And you're only doing anything new one time. So you would only do this every 10 rows, you do something new and exciting. So pretty much you're just knitting like you always know how to knit. There's not much. You're getting a lot of bang for your buck because you're not doing a lot of extra work, but you're getting a lot of extra visual interest. So, and the way you're doing this, there's a Greek word, I cannot pronounce it correct, but it means as the ox plows the field. So if you're plowing a field, you kind of go up and back and forth. It's balstrophodonically is how you could say that. No. Any questions about chart reading, about tables? I'm going to go over another one, but any questions on how I achieved this look? It is pretty straightforward. It is very straightforward, but if you have questions, let me know.
Question from Natalie on the charts. Maybe
Okay.
if we want to show that again. So knits are purls depending upon the row in the chart?
It's mainly depending on what side you are in the chart. So row number 1 is the right side. And then when you turn your work to the back, you're working on the wrong side of the work. And so row number 2 is the wrong side. So don't think about it necessarily it doesn't matter like what row you're on here. You want to think of it as where am I actually knitting? Like look at your real life, look what's happening in real life. You're holding your knitting in your hands. If you're on the right side of your work, you'll be doing purl stitches and then knits and then purls. And if you're on the wrong side of your work, you'll be doing knits, purls, and then knits. Once you do the first 2 rows and you really have kind of established, then you're just going to be knitting the knits and purling the purls, and it'll become very obvious. So as you can see here, I've got 3 purls, I've got my knits, and then I've got 3 purls. When you're looking at the back, just like magic, these 3 purl stitches changed into knits. So now I have 3 knits, but I think it's 12 purls and then 3 knits. So it just depends on which side you're on as to what you're doing. So that's the way I look at it. How would you look at it, Claire?
I was going to say it might be helpful to know that the way the chart is pictured, it's a representation of how the right side of the work looks or how the public side looks.
Yes.
Because you can't, show one row on looking from the right side and then like magically flip your paper over and show that on the wrong side too. So it's a little bit of a brain bender sometimes.
Mm. Yeah, we should design charts like that, Claire, where they're printed on both sides of the page where you can turn it over.
I'll leave that to you, Darren.
No, that's a Claire job. It's a Claire job. Any other questions at all?
Yep, we've got a couple more.
Okay.
Lisa has a good one. Does the cable needle need to match your size, the size of your knitting needle?
No, and that's a very good question. I'm knitting with size 13s, or this is an 11. And so like 11 or 13, depending on, what, which I had available. But this cable, this is the biggest one that I have, and it's much smaller than my needle. The cable needles are only holding the stitches. So the stitches are just resting on the cable needle. So I can use this very small one if I want to. And when I'm using big yarn, though, I kind of like to use a bigger one. But the only thing it's doing is it's just holding the stitches. They're just resting there. It's not shaping the stitches. Now, a problem would come into play. Let's say I was knitting with these small needles here, and I was trying to use this as my cable needle. So this cable needle is much larger. So if I slip my stitches on this needle, then it's going to stretch the stitches. So it's going to reshape them to an extent. So you want to make sure that your cable needle is smaller. It could be the same size or smaller than your regular knitting needle. So you just don't want it larger. So if it's larger, it's going to like reshape your stitches. So usually I like it to be a little smaller because it seems easier to transfer the stitches around. What do you think, Claire?
Yeah, I usually go that's a cable needle that's a little bit smaller than my knitting needle size.
Yeah, but just never larger or it will reshape your stitches.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
And then Marcia wanted to know, how do the stitch markers help?
Well, the stitch markers, every time when I do it, now this is just me, and you can live your life, live your best life however you want. But the stitch markers for me in this situation were helping when I finished a row. So I did my cable twist and I finished that row. So I put a stitch marker. And then every time I finished a row, I put a stitch marker. And then when I count these, I know once I've completed 6 rows, I'm 100% sure I'm ready to do my next twist. Otherwise, sometimes I lose track of where I am in my pattern and I'm not sure, do I twist this row? Do I twist the next one? So it just helps me keep track. So you certainly don't have to do that, but as long as you're keeping track of where you are in your pattern, that's really all that matters. Anything else?
I would also say that sometimes I put stitch markers on the needle to separate the cable from the stitches around it. And that way, when you come to that stitch marker, it's a visual reminder that, oh, I have to do something different here.
Yeah, if I were working on a real project, I would have stitch markers marking each one of my cables. I would like say this was a sweater and I had like 10 of these around the sweater. I would have stitch markers starting and stopping each one of these, just so I know where each one of my cables should start and stop. So that way I don't lose track. But anything else?
That's it for now.
Sometimes reading a chart, you might be, looking at it and watching TV or something. And sometimes it's hard to keep track of where you are in the chart. So it's nice to have a Post-it note. And then every time you finish a row, you can move the Post-it note up. And then that way you always know where you are in the chart. And this is another way to kind of help keep track of what row you're on. So that way you don't lose track. And then if you finish tonight and you come back in the morning to work on your project again, then you know what row you're supposed to be on. So I just finished my cable twist. I'm going to put my right there, and I know I'm starting on row 4 next. And if you really get distracted easily, you can use 2 Post-it notes and kind of block out everything above it and everything below it. And that way you can really just focus on, that one little line. And sometimes if it's a more complicated pattern, like for lace or something, there might be a lot of symbols and there might be a symbol in each one of these. So, it just depends on how complex your design is. So, but I usually use at least one kind of under it. And that just helps me keep track. Anything that makes it easier or, helps me stay focused, I'm willing to try it. So Anything else?
We've got just about 10 minutes left here. We did have some people ask for good beginner cabling projects. So I'm going to drop some links in the chat while Darren moves ahead here.
All right, so this honeycomb pattern is, I really love the honeycomb look. I think it's really cute and it's very insulating and you get all of this great movement and texture in your work. So I really like this one. But this one is, we're just creating cables the same way we did. Here, this cable's moving to the right. So we held this in the back and now it's moving to the left. So we held it in the front. So we're just holding, you know, depending on the positioning of where you're holding your cable needle will determine. So basically all I'm making is kind of this wavy line. So you can see I'm just making a wavy line, but when you put a wavy line next to it, that's waving, you know, in the opposite direction, it creates these beautiful honeycombs. So that's really how you create the honeycombs. I'm going to look at the chart though and show you how to do it, but this looks very complicated and impressive, but we're just doing the same thing we've been doing all along. Nothing new. So here's the honeycomb pattern. So this is giving us a picture. So one thing that's a little confusing is this little chart here is only showing us, so we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 stitches. Obviously there's more than 12 stitches here. So this is not really giving us how to make this entire swatch. This is a very large swatch. This is giving us how to make one repeat. So it's basically just giving us part of a honeycomb. So it's just giving us part of a honeycomb right there. And then what we have to do to create the whole honeycomb effect is just keep repeating this. So this is it's called a stitch repeat. And maybe you've come in contact with this idea, or maybe you haven't. So what you're going to get is you have these 8 stitches. So we're going to keep repeating these 8 stitches to create this honeycomb chart, this honeycomb pattern. So I've got my 2 stitches on the side for my border. And then the stitch repeat, I might want to repeat it, 8 stitches. I might want to repeat it 2 times or 3 times or 4 times. So that way I would have to cast on either 8 stitches, 8, 16, 24, 32. It has to be a multiple of 8. And then on the other end, I can have 2 stitches for a border. So you might see it written out multiple of 8 stitches plus 4. But if you're following a pattern, the designer will have already thought of this for you. But if you want to take this honeycomb little chart that you have here, you can make a scarf, you could make a hat, you could do whatever you want. But what you want to do is you want to cast on a multiple of 8 stitches. So 16, 24, 32 for your repeats, and then plus 4. So you have 2 stitches on each end. Or you could do 5 stitches on each end. You can do whatever you want. But what you have to make sure you're focusing on is that stitch repeat in the middle. And this is where I would have a stitch marker here and a stitch marker here. And knowing every time I came to a stitch marker, it's time to start the new repeat to make sure I'm keeping track of everything. That's how I live my life. So you can, choose to keep track of it however is best for you. So any questions about this chart and about how a stitch repeat works? And you'll see stitch repeats in Fair Isle and in lace and in all kinds of things for knitting and crochet. Does that make sense? So this, you're going to see different, there's not a standard design or a standard symbol. A designer can do anything they want. They can make however they want to make it. You can do whatever you want. That's kind of good and kind of bad. It can kind of be confusing. So here we have these dashes. And so that's purl on the right side and knit on the wrong side. And in our other chart, that was an asterisk. And then here I have a shaded square. And a shaded square with nothing else in it is knit on the right side and purl on the wrong side. Fine. And then these, which are not shaded, but they have these, little designs in them, are our cable twists. Now on the last one, all we had were these little dashes going this way or going this way. And because they kind of pointed, this one is pointing to the left and this one is pointing to the right. And here's where I find it to be very confusing. This line here, this main big line in the middle, is pointing to the right. Even though these stitches are pointing to the left, this is pointing to the right. So this is a 4-stitch right cross. So you want to make sure you're reading these symbols very carefully. Let's see if we can see that. So these little dashes are pointing to the left, but this main line here is pointing to the right. So, that could be confusing. So you want to make sure you're reading each symbol carefully and don't just glance at it and think you know what it's telling you. This main line is pointing to the left. So this is a left leaning, and it's not telling us 4/4 or 2/2. It's just telling us 4 stitches total. So we have 2, it's going to be 2 over 2. So 2/2 LC or RC. It would be similar to how it was written before. But each designer can do whatever they want here. So that's kind of the good news and the bad news, because sometimes it might be more confusing or sometimes it might be better. So just always watch out for that. And then what I did to help me keep track, I'd like to try anything I can do to help me keep track, is I wrote I wrote B and F. So I'm going to hold it in the back, I'm going to hold it in the front. And then when I get up here, I'm going to hold it in the front, and then I'm going to hold it in the back. So that's a way for me to help keep track of where I am in my pattern. If maybe you have it in your head and you're set and you're just ready to go, then you can go. But I like to put little notes on my patterns to keep track of where I am. Okay. Any questions about how to read this chart or about the symbols? And you would follow this chart exactly how we did before. You do your border, and then I'm going to do my 2/2 R. So I want it to lean to the right, so I'm going to hold it in the back. And then as soon as I finish that, immediately, I'm going to do a 2/2 L. So I want it to lean to the left, so I'm going to hold it in the front. And then you do how many ever repeats you decide to do, and then you finish with your border. And then when you turn it over, you just kind of want to look for your knits and look for your purls and just kind of knit the knits and purl the purls. Any questions about that? It's a lot of information, but it's very straightforward, and it's pretty much just repeating everything we've been doing. We're just kind of arranging our left leaning and right leaning a little bit differently in each twist. Does it make sense? Make sense to you, Claire?
Yeah, I was going to say, for a symbol like that with the little short dashes, I like to picture it as those are the stitches that are going underneath the one that's showing on the front. And so that's why they're dashed.
That's a good way to look at it. I didn't even think of that, but that makes perfect sense when you say it like that. So I just thought somebody was trying to confuse me, is what I was kind of thinking. Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. That makes more sense when you look at it like that. But the confusing part is we just finished this one where it just has the little dashes. It doesn't have the big line. So I think just finishing this one and then moving on to this one right after it kind of makes it a little confusing.
Oh, yes. It's amazing the variety of symbols that people come with to mean the exact same thing.
Yes, and people can put whatever symbol they want. So any questions at all? We've got about 5 minutes left. I'll be happy to take any questions or explain anything. If you do have questions later on, so sometimes like once you start actually working on the cables, that's when the learning happens. And so that's when the questions will come up. Feel free to send me a direct message on Instagram, and Claire will put my Instagram name in the chat. It's Mr. M-I-S-T-E-R spelled out, Mr. Woolly Bear. Or if you want to send me a direct message on Facebook, it's just my name written out and my picture's on both of them, so you'll recognize me. So just send me a direct message. Let me know if whatever you're doing, if you have questions, if you need help, and I'll be glad to, to give you some continued guidance. And if you make anything and would post pictures online, I'd love to see it, so you can tag me in it if you want to. So, anything else, Claire? Anything else? And did I miss anything?
I'll just remind everybody that we did record this class and it'll be posted online in about 24 to 48 hours. So you can watch it back again as many times as you need to. I'll also go ahead and put the link to the handout in here as well as the PDF. So you can get both versions there. Well, it's the same file, but just I think if you're on a mobile device, you need to use the link there. And then for our next classes, we're going to be off next week, but on April 18th, we'll be switching to a different yarn craft and showing you how to do some punch needling, which is a cool thing. And then the last Monday in April, April 25th, is another one of our premium classes. So if you're interested in lace knitting, we're going to be showing how to make the Melody shawl pattern in that class.
All right, so just keep practicing. The more you practice, the more comfortable it becomes in your hand, and that's really where the learning happens, is just by doing it. So keep practicing and have fun knitting. Bye.